Wow. Awesome. Yeah, you all take a seat. Thank you for that. And I really actually don't want to flatter you, but that was actually incredible. And we all learned a whole heck of a ton right then. That was amazing. I want to continue on the theme of discipleship with us. And it's a joy to be here. It really is. I have missed this a lot. And love being here with all of our team. Heaps of LA and Nashville people representing. So good to have you all here. And my beautiful wife, who is the master discipler and who constantly disciples me. Love you, honey. You're awesome. And I tell you what, I really loved yesterday. To me, there was a theme across all of the sessions, actually, that began with Pastor Valerie's encouragement in the morning about playing your own game and identity, and all of that was just, it was quite impactful for me. And I feel like there's an opportunity that we have right now to leave comparison in the past. And this is to me, I just sense like a reset in a lot of us where those kinds of encouragements we've heard so many times before, but it hit me in a different way. And my hope and prayer is that it would hit all of us in a different way, and that we would all be able to bring our most secure selves to the table and cheer one another on and believe the best and just continue taking territory for the kingdom of God together. And so I guess point number one about discipleship is to buy Pastor Phil's new book called Disciple. So if you haven't do that. Read that. And that was a little bit of flattery. I'm so sorry. I read another book recently by a theologian named Andrew Wilson. It's called Spirit and Sacrament, or Sacrament and Spirit. I can't remember which way it was, but that was a really, really good book. And I thought of that, Pastor Simon, as you were talking about how we disciple from the pulpit in our church gatherings. He has some really great thoughts in terms of the liturgy of our services and we don't often think about this as Pentecostals because we think we're not liturgical, but we are really liturgical. And so we don't think a lot about how actually the what we would call the order of service or the run sheet is actually playing a role in discipling the people in our church and being intentional about that order of service. And this is still kind of a recent thing for me, so I don't know that we've necessarily tackled this as a church, but just want to make that recommendation, that book to you. Could be helpful and jog some good ideas for you. And I would just say, in general, I think to be a good discipler, you need to be a constant learner. And that's the journey that I've been on over the last 2 years, is going from rarely reading to never stopping. And just like Pastor Simon said, being a wise person means understanding that you're not wise. And so I just trying to stay in this constant place of I don't know anything. And it's not self-deprecation, it's just kind of reality. I don't really know that much. And there are people that have poured out such scriptural wisdom. And so just be a reader, I think, is really, really important. So anyway, that's not what I want to talk about. I want to be really practical. You laid out a phenomenal theological foundation, so I'm going to give you approximately none of that and just share with you a couple of things that we're doing in our church when it comes to discipleship, because I wholeheartedly agree. We were definitely caught with our discipleship pants down, and that's not a good look, and it's not a good feeling. And so I think we ought to learn from the past couple of years and to do better. And so I'm going to just throw out a couple things. You can take them, and maybe you can make them better and apply them in your own context, and hopefully they'll be really helpful for you. Here's one thing that we've been doing is I find that a lot of times, because discipleship happens incidentally, it happens in life, it happens over coffee, over lunch, all these kinds of different, gathering points. A lot of times, if we're not going into those conversations with a great deal of intention, they can actually be quite fruitless. Have you ever left like a coffee with somebody and the coffee was actually just quite aimless and pointless, and they didn't really grow from their time with you, and you kind of just felt like it was a waste of your time? I got sick of having those kinds of coffees, and as a recovering control freak, I got sick of worrying about whether or not the people on our staff and on our team were having those kinds of coffees, most of the time on the church's dime. I was like, well, if I'm going to be paying for the coffee, then I want to really make sure that it was an effective time that you're spending with these people. And so one of the things that we've put into place is every time we meet with somebody, we have 4 questions that we always want to make sure are being asked. Every time you meet up with somebody, we ought to do our best to bring these 4 questions to the discussion to ensure that fruitfulness and growth is actually really happening. And these can be quite kind of confronting questions. No, I wouldn't say overly so, but I'll get to them in a minute. But they can be a little bit confronting, but that's what discipleship is. It's like he was saying, it's not just encouragement. It is correction, it is rebuke, it's exhortation. And I heard a great quote recently that when you become a Navy SEAL, there's no class that you take on overcoming fear. You don't get taught, hey, here's how you overcome fear because you're going to face it. And that's because they operate with this mentality that when you become a Navy SEAL, that means that you were already a Navy SEAL already in your heart. And so I think we have to carry that into discipleship. There's going to be a lot of moments in discipleship that they're going to need to overcome. And rather than always preparing people for difficulty, just bring them into difficulty. Bring them into awkwardness, because the moment that they signed up to become a follower of Jesus, they signed up to become a disciple. And so they're more ready for it than I think oftentimes we think they are. And they're more open to it oftentimes than we think they are. So these are the 4 questions that we're always asking our people. I require this now of our staff and of our entire leadership team. Number 1, how is your relationship with God? I want to make sure that question is always being asked of people when we're sitting down with them. Just like Pastor Simon said, discipleship is following Jesus. And so it's not following another person, although that's part of it. Follow me as I follow Christ. But on the whole, it's following the Lord, which means that one major hindrance to discipleship is comparison. We all know the story where Jesus, after his resurrection, pulls Peter aside. There's this restoring moment. And then Peter turns, he says, what about him? He's looking at John, and Jesus says, you follow me. And so it's really, really important that we don't take for granted that the people in our churches, that their relationship with the Lord is as healthy as we would like those relationships to be. If people aren't spending dedicated time with the Lord, they're not going to hear from him. And I would say if they're not spending regularly extended time with the Lord, they're going to be hearing from him really fuzzily. I have found that God speaks to me over the course of hours, not minutes. And we live in a very busy society, and so people often don't give God hours. They give him, 10, 15 minutes in the morning, which is a good daily habit. But I think actually our people need to be taught, you should probably, once, twice a month, give him your entire Saturday morning. Just give him from 9 to 1, and God is going to speak to them if they can widen that window, if they can open that space. It's like Pastor Phil was talking about last night. If we're to be a people who make room, that can't just be in our church gatherings. We have to be a people who actually make room. And so we have to teach the people in our church to do that. And I think sometimes as pastors, we actually are nervous about that because we're actually afraid that God's going to tell them something that we don't want God to tell them. Or maybe that they're going to hear, a little incorrectly. And so they'll, run off and do their own thing. But my conviction is that Jesus is building the church. And so if Jesus is building the church, then I can trust the voice of the Lord to tell them things that are ultimately going to be fruitful for the body of Christ. And so I don't think as pastors we should shy away from encouraging people to spend time with the Lord. I think we can obviously give really good wisdom that when they feel like they're hearing something from God, to make sure that wisdom is found in a multitude of counselors, that they're submitting it, to the people in their small group, their dinner party, to their leaders, their pastors, all that kind of stuff. One thing that I would say to people is that when I do this, when I go and spend extended time with God, I just assume that everything I hear in the first hour is me, not him. Because it takes at least an hour for me to get out of my own head. And, a lot of the stuff is just my own frustrations bubbling up. And oftentimes we're so good at repackaging those as great ideas. You come home, hey, here's what we're going to do. But it's not actually God. It's just, the fact that things aren't going as well as you want them to. And so, but that's why you need time. And you need a whole lot of it with God. And going back to the comparison thing, like I only want to do things that God is telling me to do. I don't want to do things anymore because it's working for this person, or I just want to do the stuff that God is telling me to do. But that can't be true just of us. That has to be true of our people. And our churches will be healthier if we can encourage this kind of behavior in the people that we lead. So when we're sitting down with them, hey, how is your relationship with God? And don't just accept like the surface answer. Like actually dig deep into their relationship with the Lord. And that's gonna bear fruit in their own personal life. The second question that we ask them on a very, very regular basis is, what's your relationship like with money? We've had with our team a lot of conversation about money over the years, and it's always that point that's just, it's an awkward thing to talk about with people, diving deeply into the health of their financial world. And so I think when things are awkward, the solution to that, if it's an important thing, is not to back away from it, it's to normalize it. And so rather than, waiting to have a corrective conversation with somebody because they're not, faithfully giving or whatever else, just bring it up all the time. And so I want, my aim, and we're, our training wheels are still on with implementing this kind of approach to discipleship, but our aim is that our church would actually expect when they're sitting down, with a pastor or someone who's leading them, they would expect these kinds of questions to be asked. And so they're used to, being talked to about these kinds of subject. Here's the deal with money, right? Like seasons and circumstances in life change, and that means people's relationship with money changes. No relationship can just be left to itself and remain in a place of health. All relationships are dynamic, and so they have to be constantly tended to. So we should not assume that just because somebody's relationship with money is healthy right now, that 6 months from now it's going to continue to be healthy. And so we ought to be constantly discipling people in regards to their relationship to their finances. And I would include in that their relationship to things like the tithe and partnering in vision builders or whatever it is that y'all do in your local context. Bringing those things into the conversation regularly, I think, will be very, very helpful for you. And honestly, if you're a senior pastor here and you really want your team to get better at having these kinds of discussions, the more they do it, the more comfortable they're going to become. It's going to make them like discipleship ninjas because there'll be nothing that they're afraid to talk about. And that's a pretty big key. You need to be unafraid. Jesus wasn't afraid to turn around and rebuke Peter. And I don't think any of us should go home and start calling anyone Satan. But there's a just one or two. But there's a level of fearlessness that needs to be had in the people who are discipling. And so we want them to have that. Number 3, what difficulties are you facing relationally right now? This question should constantly be asked. What difficulties? By the way, we printed these 4 questions on cards, and I handed them out to our lead team. I said, put this in your wallet. Every time you're going to meet with somebody, look at it and have these questions at the forefront of your mind. What difficulties are you facing relationally right now? So life is relationship, right? And so when relationships are not good, then life is generally not good. And I've found that people's engagement in church tends to be impacted the most by the health of their relationships in life. So if life is relationally bad, a lot of times that means that they're disengaging, they're pulling back, they're dropping balls, or maybe they're getting offended at people because they're seeing everything through the filter of this relational issue that they have going on over here. And I don't think that people readily volunteer relational unhealth. I think when we meet with people, we shouldn't assume that they're going to bring their relational issues to us, because sometimes people feel a sense of shame about how they're doing relationally. And so we often need to do a little bit of digging. And so asking that question, how are you doing relationally right now, I think is really important. Another thing that it'll do is if there's tension between people in the church, it'll bring that to the surface. And it'll help you to identify, what potentially can become cancerous or harmful, and just bring healing to those tensions and help lead people through forgiveness and recovery in those relationships. And our churches will be a lot healthier if the individual relationships that comprise the church are healthy as well. And so just asking that question on a regular basis, I think, is really, really important. And the fourth question is this. what are your next steps in church? I think we should always be asking that question. We all want our team, we all want our staffs and our leaders to be such believers in the vision that we're carrying as a church. And part of believing in the vision is being able to communicate the vision. And part of being able to communicate in the vision and part of believing the vision is asking people to join in the vision. And I would say for a lot of time, I've carried the weight on myself to be the primary person who calls people to the vision of the church, and using the pulpit for that, which means sometimes my communication can get kind of one-dimensional because it's always harvesting, and this needs diversity, right? And so one of the keys to that is that the load of calling people to the vision needs to be shared across the team. And so our teams and the people that we're leading need to feel a great sense of shamelessness when it comes to asking people, what do you see for yourselves next when it comes to the steps that you're taking in the church? And everybody loves to have an I see in you conversation. No person that you sit down with is going to be bummed out because you say, hey, here's what I see in you. And here's the gifts that I think you bring into this local body of Christ. And so just training our people to constantly have that conversation, I think, is really important. And being shameless about asking people to step up matters a whole lot. Every single Christian has at least one spiritual gift that the scriptures teach God sovereignly gave them. They didn't choose it. God gave it to them, which means God has given them something to steward. And so that means God has an expectation, right? I was talking about last night. He has an expectation upon them. And part of them living righteously is embracing and fulfilling that expectation that God has upon them in giving them that gift. That's what the parable of the talents is about. And so if we're a little timid around calling people to step in and to use their gifts and to help them identify their gifts, then ultimately we're doing a disservice to them. And so all of us need to feel the weight of that responsibility. So how's your relationship with God? What's your relationship like with money? What difficulties are you facing relationally right now? And what are your next steps in church? And the last thing I'll say, I got just 2 minutes left. That's a real specific pastoral tool. On the whole, what we're attempting to do right now is to genuinely weave in a culture of multiplication into our church. I read a book a couple years ago called Exponential by Dave and John Ferguson, I think are their names. Wonderful book. And they have this great vision that they put forth that is something that's really spoke to me. Maybe you want to read that book. It'll speak to you as well. But what we're attempting to do, and I think this is the heart of what Pastor Phil is talking about when he says every Christian, especially leader, needs to have at all times at least one name on paper for who they are discipling. And I think that on paper thing is really important because if you were to ask somebody who they are discipling, they might be able to talk kind of ambiguously. I got this person over here that I see every now and then and that person. But no. Who's the person on paper that you are intentionally discipling? And I think the best barometer for discipleship is, are you teaching them to do what you do? And that goes back to Jesus' call of the 12 in Mark chapter 3. It says that he called them to himself that he might be with them. So there's the process of discipleship, just being together regularly. And it says that he called them or named them apostles. Now, the word apostle means sent one. So in giving them their title, Jesus was actually telling them what they were going to be doing. A lot of times when we disciple people, there's not a clear vision for why it is that we're spending time with them. And, I think we kind of depend upon that they're going to organically imbibe from us what it is that we'd like them to get. But Jesus is very clear. And he said, I'm calling you apostles so that I may send you to preach the kingdom and to drive out demons. In other words, I'm training you to do what I do. So what we're doing right now, we're taking, the entirety of this year, one of the things that we're going to do is we want to get to the end of this year and make sure that we have a really strong culture, focusing first in our small groups, that small group leaders understand that one of their responsibilities is creating an environment for people to connect. But another one of their responsibilities is that have to have at least one person on paper that they are teaching to do what they do. I'm tired of gearing up for growth. I don't want to go into seasons of growth. I want to be a culture that's constantly multiplying, and so that growth is always happening. So God bless you guys. Thank you so much. Hopefully that's helpful for you.